G'day everyone. Wanted to talk to you about something that's been on my mind for the last couple of weeks actually. Well, it's been on my mind for a while and I wanted to have a discussion with you all about it because I'd love to know your thoughts and you can put those down below when we finished. Um, Sony, I've been called often a Sony fanboy, and that is true in the fact that I do love their gear. But when the time comes to it, I do call out Sony for things that I think aren't right. And I wanted to talk to you about firmware, which I believe they're not being as good as what other manufacturers are being, particularly at the moment. Well, even for a while. And I wanted to discuss that with you. The thing with Sony is they've had basically the mirrorless world to themselves for the full frame cameras for a couple of years now. Really, they were the leading company at the start. Their cameras were way more advanced than anyone else's cameras out there, so they really had no competition. But that's starting to change very, very fast. And it does worry me if they don't change their thinking that it might actually start to hurt Sony due to the fact of what they're giving us. When I say giving us, what they're holding back in the older cameras. They're not giving people that purchase their gear really any new features and things like that with firmware, which they could do easily. I know for a long period of time, people have been asking Sony to change the color of the focus instead of being grey to something like you could set the little square to being green or yellow or red or whatever you'd like to ask for. People have been asking for that for an awful long time. There's other things too, like Sony A9. That was sort of promised early on that the colour profiles will be put on there, and they haven't really added anything in that regard either. And it's a little bit disappointing how they're treating customers in that regard, because they're forcing customers to go up to and purchase a new camera. Whereas if you're in the Fuji realm, now even Nikon, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, if you're from Nikon, if you're from Fuji, if you're from Panasonic, they are really adding amazing new features in those cameras, and it really does bring new life to their cameras, and I'm sure Sony could do that as well. It's interesting because I've just installed, and I've done a video just in the yesterday actually, I posted it this morning, about Camrote and the trouble people are having with that app due to the fact that Sony have changed the way those cameras work for things like focusing and things like that. And there's no reason I believe they should be doing that to their users. If you do want to use a remote, like your iPhone, to do remote capture, things like that, you can't focus on any of the newer cameras. You can if you've got an A7R2 or an A6500 and things like that. But for some reason, Sony took that ability away from users with their latest cameras, and I don't understand why. They've taken out the time-lapse from their latest cameras, and again, I don't understand why. They took out the Play Memories apps, and again, I don't understand why, without replacing it, or at least putting something like the time-lapse app in, in the firmware. So there's times where Sony need to be called out, and this is what I'd like to say. Yes, I do love Sony. I am a fanboy, but I still will call out Sony when I think they're being wrong. And it's interesting because just talking about Camrote, I wanted to take you through where Canon have just announced this. Okay, so let's look at what Canon have just announced. They did it on this Wednesday, the 2nd of January 2019. They've announced a new SDK and API. And what that's going to do, it's going to give these, it's going to allow all new camera control for their latest cameras. And you can see here, basically it says detecting and disconnecting the camera, checking and changing camera settings including the time, remote shooting, downloading, erasing images and formatting cards. Now, that's not that different to what Sony have allowed, but I can guarantee to you that will allow something like remote focus. Canon always seem to allow that through their apps. So that's one really interesting fact here. When I've been playing around with that Camrote that's just been announced or released recently, and I put a video up about that this morning, one of the things that Simon was saying was he couldn't allow the focusing on the latest cameras due to the fact that Sony had locked that out of the latest APIs using that camera, the A7 III, the A9 and the A7R3, which is ridiculous, and I don't understand why Sony is holding that back. There's no reason why they should be holding that back. And taking out things like time lapse again is one of the things that that they've done as well. There's no reason that they couldn't give us a time lapse in the firmware that's in the camera as it is. And these are really frustrating things that Sony tend to be doing to us, whereas the other manufacturers don't seem to hold back on their firmware in that regard. But let's look now at what Nikon have just said that they're going to announce. So if we look at here, the Nikon Z cameras to get IAF, RAW video and CF Express support. Now they're saying down here that an update will come including IAF, RAW video and CF Express support. You can see here if I play this little video how the IAF seems to work beautifully actually. It looks like it's working very, very well. And this is only a pre-production shot, so I suppose it's going to get even better. And they're saying there that it's upcoming for the Z6 and the Z7. RAW video is a massive thing that's been announced for video shooters. You are going to have to use the Atmos Ninja V, I suppose due to the fact of the requirements to record internally. But again, it's an option that you're going to be able to have to put on that camera if videographers would like to use this in RAW. Now this still may come, but I guarantee if this comes for Sony, we're going to have to purchase that as a new camera. There's no way they will give us that on a camera that's already been announced and released. And it's really interesting to see that they're offering these extra features at no cost probably to their users, and it's amazing features. And I think that's absolutely brilliant of Nikon to do that for their customers. They're not forcing them to buy a new camera. They could have easily said, we're going to release a high-end model of this camera that will give the ability to shoot RAW. They haven't done that. They've enabled this to be used in their Z7 and their Z6 series of cameras. And I think that's brilliant. Now, if that camera had dual card slots now, I would be totally recommending that system once these updates come out as a great alternative, or even in a lot of ways better than what Sony have got currently. Now, I don't know what they're going to offer with the A7S III. Yes, we don't know that yet. But this is an update to an existing camera. They didn't have to do this, and they actually have done that. Now, to give you an idea, let's have a look at a typical Sony update. Now, I just chose the version 2 firmware as a guide to show you what we're getting through Sony. Now you can see there's often fixes for latest lenses come out, and you'd expect that to be given, that there's a update here for the 400 2.8 GM lens. There's addition of a function ring lens in the menu. 2 lenses, the APS-C 35. There's a setting that's available to be set on that. What else have we got? There's some different stuff you can add for the 24 GM and the Sony 400mm 2.8. When silent shooting is selected, it's a sound thing on there. New features, AF track sensitivity assigned to a custom key when used with that adapter. Focus area option, an added zone expandable flexible spot and lock on AF. Bracket shooting is available during silent shooting. Now, this is what always comes up, and this is the usual thing that they come up and say, is improvement of performance and overall stability of the camera. We never get told what that is, but basically they're saying that the overall camera's more stable. Better reproduction of the gradation of RAW pictures, and there's another couple of things there, but nothing. Look, if you look at that, that's a typical Sony firmware upgrade. We get really nothing new that's substantial. Now, just as a guide, I want to show you what other manufacturers are starting to do. Well, they're not starting to do, they've done it for a while. If you look at the Fuji X-T3 firmware, this has added 4K HDR video. Again, that's an incredible addition that's added on there. Yes, we have that in the A7 III, but we haven't got it in the A9. We haven't got that in the A7R III, and easily they could do it. So the Sony X-T3 has added 4K HDR video recording. So that's one thing they've added. They've added simultaneous output of film simulation and F-log footage. Again, that's amazing. They've added this display color temperature on the EVF. It's some display temperature they've added. Support slower shutter speeds when they're using video. Also, they've said down here, what else has it said? and some power supply things and stuff like that. So you look at the features that have added there. The 4K HDR alone is an amazing addition. So, and if you check on Fuji's firmware updates for all of their previous history, they do add real features. And I'm talking about if you had an XT1, some of those features that they added gave new life to that camera, and we've never ever had that ability, or really Sony have never given us that ability in any of their updates where it's had a real major upgrade like what Sony have or what Fuji have just offered. If you look at the GH5, I've just gone back to version 2 here because that was a more substantial upgrade. You can see here that the additional things that have been put there, they've 4K HDR recording, HLG hybrid log gamma, HDR and high dynamic range. They've added enhancement of the anamorphic video recording mode, enhancement of the embodied stabilizer. They added that IS lock, which is incredible. It's an unbelievable feature having that as well. And it's crazy that they've added all intra video recording, which is 422 10-bit all intra video recording. You can see here that they've added amazing features against what, say, Sony have given us. And I just think it's about time that Sony started looking after their users that have bought their previous cameras. Now, yes, I know they want you to buy the latest gear, but there's no reason why they can't give you some features on the older cameras. I do believe it still wouldn't stop people from buying the new gear, because we are all gearheads and people would still purchase the latest gear. But I think it's time for Sony to stop holding back and to give something back to their users. And I do hope that Sony listen to this. And this is coming from a Sony fanboy. Like I've said to you all along, I will say the truth, and I will say when I think Sony could be doing better. And this is one area where particularly I think they could be doing a lot better. So let me know in the comment box down below what you think about this. I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you think Sony could look after the users more with their firmware upgrades and be like Nikon have, Fuji, and also Panasonic have? I'd love to know your thoughts on that. And the one thing I can say to Sony is you have to be careful, Sony, because you have had this game all to yourself for a fair period of time now, and that's changing. If Nikon release a dual card slot camera, that camera is going to be amazing. If Canon release a high-end mirrorless camera with dual card slots that works well and they haven't held back like Canon have previously, that's also going to put incredible pressure onto Sony. And if the Panasonic is amazing, we still don't know the full specs of that yet, that's also going to put pressure on Sony. So I think Sony, it's about time you started looking after your users to make sure they're happy. And that's all for now. Bye, guys.